Think about everything you know of ancient history: the pyramids, the rise of Rome, the conquests of Alexander the Great. Now imagine this: what if the stories we've been told are just the tip of the iceberg? What if there are hidden chapters, events so pivotal they reshaped civilizations, yet they've been buried under dust and time, forgotten by most? Picture entire empires rising and falling because of decisions made in shadows, wars fought over things we've barely heard of, technologies lost that could have changed the world. These aren't just footnotes, they're the untold turning points that quietly steered the course of history itself. Some of the most astonishing moments from antiquity never made it into our textbooks. A single battle, a whispered conspiracy, an invention lost to the ages, each one a ripple that grew into a wave, crashing into the shores of empires and religions, altering the fate of millions. How many of us have heard of the Bronze Age collapse, when entire civilizations vanished overnight, leaving behind only silence and ruins, or the forgotten trade routes that connected continents long before we thought such things were possible? These aren't just curiosities, they're the missing pieces of a puzzle we've been trying to solve for centuries. That's why we're setting out on a journey today, one that will uncover 30 of these extraordinary, overlooked events. We'll travel back to moments when the world hung in the balance, when a single decision or discovery sent history spiraling in a new direction. From the secret alliances that toppled kings to the abandoned innovations that could have rewritten the future, each of these stories holds a power we've only just begun to understand. So if you're ready to see history in a whole new light, to step beyond the familiar and into the extraordinary, then stay with me, because what comes next will change the way you see the ancient world forever. At the height of the Bronze Age, the Mediterranean world was a dazzling network of mighty empires and thriving cities connected by trade and diplomacy. The Hittites ruled over Anatolia with their formidable chariot armies. The Mycenaeans built towering palaces in Greece, their warriors immortalized in Homer's epics. Egypt stood as an unshakable superpower, its pharaohs commanding wealth beyond imagination. Then, sometime around 1200 BCE, everything fell apart. Within just a few decades, palaces burned to the ground, entire cities were abandoned, and writing systems vanished. The Bronze Age collapse wasn't just a setback, it was a full-blown apocalypse for some of history's greatest civilizations. What could have brought such powerful societies to their knees so suddenly? Scholars still debate the causes, but the evidence paints a picture of multiple disasters striking at once. Some point to the mysterious Sea Peoples, marauders who appear in ancient records as a destructive force sweeping through the region, though their true origins remain lost to time. Others argue that a centuries-long drought crippled agriculture, sparking famine and mass migrations. Still, more suggest that internal chaos, revolts, crumbling trade networks, or even the collapse of critical bronze production left these empires vulnerable to collapse from within. The truth may lie in a perfect storm of all these factors, a domino effect that no king or army could stop. The aftermath reshaped the world forever. The Hittite Empire dissolved, its language forgotten for millennia. Mycenaean Greece plunged into a dark age, its people abandoning writing and retreating into simpler villages. Even mighty Egypt, though it survived, never fully regained its former glory. But from this chaos emerged something new, the Iron Age. With bronze supplies cut off, societies turned to iron, a stronger, more accessible metal that would revolutionize warfare and industry. The old powers were gone, but their fall made room for new cultures like the Phoenicians and early Greeks, who would one day lay the foundations of the classical world. The Bronze Age collapse wasn't just an ending. It was the harsh, transformative birth of a different era, proving that even the greatest civilizations are never truly permanent. Among the swirling mysteries of the Bronze Age collapse, few figures loom larger or more shadowy than the Sea Peoples. Ancient records from Egypt and the crumbling Hittite Empire describe them as a terrifying force, sweeping in from the Mediterranean with fire and sword. Pharaoh Ramses III carved their devastation into temple walls, showing chaotic battles where these seaborne raiders clashed with Egyptian forces. But who were they? Where did they come from? To this day, no one knows for certain, and that ambiguity makes their story all the more gripping. Theories about their origins range from the plausible to the wildly speculative. Some scholars suggest they were displaced refugees, victims of the very collapse they're accused of causing. Others argue they were a loose confederation of pirates and mercenaries, drawn from coastal regions across the Mediterranean. A few inscriptions link them to places like Sardinia, Sicily, or even the distant Aegean, but these clues are frustratingly vague. What's undeniable is their impact. The Sea Peoples didn't just raid, they shattered. City after city fell before them, from wealthy Ugarit in Syria to the Hittite capital of Hattusa, its ruins showing signs of violent destruction. Yet the true puzzle isn't just who they were, but why they struck with such ferocity. Some believe climate change played a role. Prolonged droughts might have pushed desperate populations to migrate, sparking chain reactions of conflict. Others point to the collapse of trade routes, cutting off vital resources and leaving once stable kingdoms vulnerable. Whatever the trigger, the Sea Peoples became both symptom and cause of a world unraveling. By the time their rampage ended, entire civilizations lay in ruins, their records burned, their languages silenced. What's haunting is how little they left behind. Unlike the empires they helped topple, the Sea Peoples left no grand monuments, no royal chronicles, just echoes in the records of those who barely survived them. Even their name is a modern label pulled from fragmentary Egyptian texts. They were, in many ways, history's ultimate disruptors, a force powerful enough to reshape the ancient world, yet ephemeral enough to vanish almost without a trace. And that's what makes their legacy so enduring, not just the ruin they left in their wake, but the unanswered questions that still tantalize us today. Deep in the marshlands of southern Spain, where the Guadalquivir River meets the Atlantic, lies one of antiquity's most tantalizing mysteries, the lost city of Tartessos. Unlike the ruins of Rome or Athens, Tartessos left behind no crumbling temples or grand statues. Instead, it exists in fragments, fleeting mentions in Greek texts, enigmatic artifacts pulled from River Silt, and legends so vivid they sparked debates for centuries. To the ancient Greeks, Tartessos was a land of staggering wealth, ruled by silver-clad kings who traded with merchants from across the known world. But by the 5th century BCE, this flourishing civilization had vanished so completely that later writers wondered if it had ever been real at all. What made Tartessos so extraordinary? The answer lies in its geography and ingenuity. Nestled along mineral-rich mountains and fertile river plains, the Tartessians mastered metallurgy, extracting silver and gold in quantities that dazzled their trading partners. Phoenician merchants, drawn by these riches, established colonies nearby, creating a cultural melting pot where ideas and goods flowed freely. Tartessian artisans produced intricate jewelry and bronze ware, while their language, preserved on a handful of cryptic stone tablets, remains undeciphered to this day. Even the biblical King Solomon allegedly sourced his legendary silver from Tartessian mines, a testament to their far-reaching influence. Then, abruptly, the lights went out. No more inscriptions, no more trade records, just silence. Theories about their disappearance range from the plausible to the fantastical. Some historians point to natural disasters, seismic activity, or rising sea levels could have flooded their low-lying cities. Others suggest economic collapse, as overmining exhausted their precious resources or rival powers disrupted their trade networks. But the most enduring theory ties Tartessos to a far older myth, the tale of Atlantis. Greek philosopher Plato described Atlantis as a wealthy, advanced civilization that sank beneath the waves in a single catastrophic day. the parallels are striking. Tartessos, too, was a maritime power of unmatched prosperity, lost to time and water. Could the two stories share a common origin? Archaeology hasn't given us a definitive answer. Excavations in the Andalusian wetlands have uncovered Tartessian tombs and tools, but no grand city has ever been found. Some believe its remains lie buried under layers of sediment, waiting for a modern-day Schliemann to uncover them. Others argue Tartessos wasn't a single city at all, but a decentralized network of settlements that faded gradually into obscurity. What's undeniable is its legacy, a cautionary tale of how even the most brilliant civilizations can slip through the cracks of history, leaving behind only whispers and wonder. Whether Tartessos inspired Atlantis or simply met a fate equally as dramatic, its story reminds us that the ancient world still holds secrets we've only begun to uncover. Scattered across the steamy jungles of Mexico's Gulf Coast, staring silently through centuries of rain and sun, stand the Olmec Colossal Heads, monolithic sculptures so striking they defy easy explanation. Carved from single blocks of volcanic basalt, some weighing over 20 tons, these massive stone faces tower as tall as 9 feet. Their features a mix of the human and the otherworldly. With flattened noses, thick lips, and enigmatic expressions, they seem to guard secrets of a civilization that flourished over 3,000 years ago, long before the Maya or Aztecs rose to power. The Olmecs, often called Mesoamerica's mother culture, left no written records, but these heads speak volumes if only we could decipher their language. Who do these stone giants represent? The prevailing theory suggests they depict powerful Olmec rulers, immortalized in stone as symbols of their authority. Each head wears a distinct helmet or headdress, possibly indicating rank or connection to the gods. But there's a twist: the basalt used to carve them wasn't local. These rocks were hauled from quarries dozens of miles away, an astonishing feat for a society without wheels or draft animals. Imagine teams of laborers navigating swamps and rivers, transporting multi-ton boulders using nothing but ropes, logs, and sheer determination. The effort hints at a society with centralized power, capable of mobilizing vast resources, and a reverence for leadership so profound it demanded literal monuments. The Olmec's influence rippled far beyond their heartland. Their artwork, religious symbols, and even their ball game, a ritual sport later adopted by the Maya and Aztecs, appear like cultural blueprints across Mesoamerica. Jaguar motifs, serpent deities, and the iconic word jaguar figures all trace back to Olmec creativity. Yet for all their sophistication, the civilization vanished abruptly around 400 BC. Unlike the Bronze Age collapse, there's no evidence of invasion or catastrophe. Instead, the Olmecs seem to have faded, their cities reclaimed by the jungle while their ideas lived on, woven into the fabric of later empires. What's most haunting about the colossal heads isn't just their craftsmanship, it's their isolation. No two are exactly alike, yet they share an uncanny realism, as if capturing the essence of individuals lost to time. Were they meant to intimidate, to honor, to serve as conduits between the living and the divine? Without written records, we're left to speculate. But their sheer durability is a testament. While the Olmecs themselves retreated into shadow, their legacy endures, carved in stone and etched into the DNA of civilizations that followed. These heads aren't just artifacts, they're silent witnesses to a world that shaped the course of history, then vanished, leaving only stone faces to gaze into the future. For nearly 100 years, Egypt, the land of pharaohs and pyramids, was ruled by outsiders. The Hyksos, a term meaning rulers of foreign lands, stormed into the Nile Delta around 1650 BC, not as raiders but as conquerors. Unlike the Sea Peoples who left chaos in their wake, the Hyksos established a dynasty, building their capital at Avaris and ruling Lower Egypt with an iron grip. To the Egyptians, this was unthinkable humiliation. Their civilization, proud and insular, had always seen itself as divinely ordained, untouched by foreign dominion. Yet here were these outsiders, not just occupying their land but thriving in it, even adopting Egyptian titles and customs while introducing radical innovations that would change warfare forever. The Hyksos brought with them technologies the Egyptians had never seen. Their most transformative gift, the horse-drawn chariot, light, fast, and deadly. These vehicles revolutionized combat, turning battles into high-speed maneuvers rather than slow clashes of infantry. The Hyksos also introduced composite bows, stronger and more accurate than Egypt's traditional weapons, and advanced fortification techniques, including glacis ramparts designed to repel attackers. For a civilization that had long relied on its geographic isolation, these innovations were a wake-up call. The Hyksos didn't just conquer Egypt, they forced it to adapt or perish. But their reign wasn't destined to last. Resentment simmered in Thebes, where a line of native Egyptian princes bided their time. By 1550 BC, the tide turned. Pharaoh Ahmose I launched a relentless campaign, besieging Avaris and driving the Hyksos back to their homeland in the Levant. Victory wasn't enough for the Egyptians, they sought obliteration. Temples were dismantled, records destroyed, and Hyksos monuments defaced. It was one of history's first systematic attempts to erase a people from memory. Yet the irony is thick. While the Egyptians vilified the Hyksos as barbaric invaders, they eagerly adopted their military advancements. The very chariots and weapons that had once threatened them now powered Egypt's new kingdom empire, fueling conquests that stretched from Nubia to Syria. What's most fascinating isn't just the Hyksos' rise and fall, it's the duality of their legacy. They were both hated and imitated, reviled yet indispensable. Their rule exposed Egypt's vulnerabilities, shattering the myth of its invincibility and pushing it to evolve into a military powerhouse. Even their name, Hyksos, was an Egyptian label, a dismissive term for rulers they refused to acknowledge as legitimate. Yet without them, Egypt might never have become the empire we remember. The Hyksos were the invaders who, in defeat, handed their conquerors the tools for domination, proof that history's most transformative moments often come from the most unexpected places. The island of Thera was once a jewel of the Aegean, a bustling hub of the Minoan civilization with its whitewashed buildings, intricate frescoes, and a thriving harbor. Then, in an instant, everything changed. Around 1600 BC, the island now known as Santorini experienced one of the most violent volcanic eruptions in recorded history. The explosion was so massive it could be heard hundreds of miles away, sending plumes of ash 20 miles into the sky and triggering tsunamis that crashed into Crete just 70 miles to the south. Thera didn't just erupt, it tore itself apart, collapsing into the sea and leaving behind a shattered caldera where a thriving city once stood. This wasn't merely a natural disaster, it was an event so cataclysmic that some believe it birthed the legend of Atlantis itself. The immediate aftermath was apocalyptic. The tsunamis devastated Crete's northern coast, sweeping away ports and settlements. Ash blanketed farmland, smothering crops and plunging the region into years of famine. Trade routes, the lifeblood of Minoan prosperity, were severed as ships vanished beneath the waves or found their destinations reduced to rubble. The Minoans, renowned for their seafaring prowess and artistic brilliance, suddenly found their world unraveling. Without trade, their economy faltered. Without food, their people suffered. And without stability, their once unshakable influence in the Mediterranean began to crumble. But the eruption's impact extended far beyond Crete. Ash from Thera traveled across the globe, leaving traces as far as Greenland and China. Some scientists argue the event triggered a decades-long climate shift, with cooler temperatures and failed harvests destabilizing societies from Egypt to Mesopotamia. Even the Egyptians recorded unusual weather patterns, their hieroglyphs describing a darkness that covered the sun, a possible reference to Thera's ash cloud. The disruption created a power vacuum, one that rising powers like the Mycenaeans eagerly filled, absorbing Minoan culture while supplanting their dominance. The connection to Atlantis adds another layer of mystery. Plato's tale, written over 1,000 years later, describes a wealthy island kingdom that sank beneath the waves in a single day of fire and flood. The parallels are striking. Thera's advanced society, its sudden destruction, even its circular harbor resembling Plato's descriptions. Could the Minoan eruption have been the seed of this enduring myth? While scholars debate the link, the story's persistence speaks to the eruption's psychological impact. It wasn't just a geological event, it was a trauma etched into collective memory, a warning of nature's power to humble even the greatest civilizations. What's most haunting is how abruptly Thera's story ended. Excavations at Antikythera, a Minoan settlement on the island, reveal a city frozen in time. Buildings stand intact, their vibrant frescoes still clinging to walls, their pottery left where it fell. There are no skeletons, suggesting the inhabitants fled before the final cataclysm. But where did they go? No records survive. Thera's destruction wasn't just a tragedy, it was a vanishing act, leaving behind only whispers in ash and legend. For the Minoans, the eruption marked the beginning of the end, a slow decline that would see their palaces abandoned and their writing forgotten. Yet from their ashes rose new powers, proving once again that in the ancient world, catastrophe wasn't just an ending, it was the birth of something new. The battlefield of Kadesh stretched endlessly under the scorching sun, littered with broken chariots and the fallen. It was 1274 BCE, and two of the ancient world's mightiest empires, the Hittites under King Muwatalli II and Egypt led by Ramses the Great, had clashed in a brutal stalemate. Neither side could claim victory, yet neither could afford to keep fighting. The cost was too high: lost soldiers, drained treasuries, and a frontier teetering on chaos. Out of this exhaustion came something extraordinary: the first written peace treaty in human history, a pact so groundbreaking it would echo through the ages. Carved into silver tablets and later etched onto the walls of Egyptian temples, the treaty's terms were startlingly modern. It declared an end to hostilities, pledged mutual defense against external threats, and even included clauses for the return of refugees, a remarkably humane touch for the era. The language was precise, almost legalistic, with both kings swearing by their gods to uphold the agreement. What's striking isn't just the treaty's existence, but its balance. Unlike later peace deals imposed by victors, this was a negotiation between equals. The Hittites, though battered, were far from defeated, and Ramses, despite his boasts of triumph at Kadesh, knew continued war would cripple Egypt. The treaty wasn't born of goodwill alone. It was cold, hard pragmatism, a recognition that survival sometimes meant shaking hands with an old enemy. The ripple effects were profound. For the first time, diplomacy replaced relentless conquest as a tool of statecraft. Trade routes reopened, and merchants moved freely between Hatti and Egypt, exchanging goods and ideas. The stability allowed smaller kingdoms like Assyria and Babylon to breathe, no longer crushed between the ambitions of two superpowers. Even more remarkable was the treaty's durability. When the Hittite king Hattusili III faced rebellion at home, he sent his daughter to marry Ramses, sealing their alliance with blood as well as ink. The marriage wasn't just political theater, it was a testament to how deeply both sides valued the peace they'd built. Yet the treaty's greatest legacy might be its very existence as a written document. Earlier agreements were verbal or symbolic, easily denied or forgotten. By committing their words to silver and stone, the Hittites and Egyptians created a record that transcended memory. Copies were stored in temples and read aloud periodically, a ritual that reinforced the pact's sacred weight. When archaeologists uncovered fragments of the treaty in the ruins of Hattusa and Karnak millennia later, they weren't just finding ancient history, they were holding the blueprint for modern diplomacy. In a world where war had always been the default, the Treaty of Kadesh dared to imagine another way, that even the bitterest rivals could choose peace, not because they were weak, but because they were wise. In the heart of ancient Nineveh, beneath the shadow of towering ziggurats, King Ashurbanipal of Assyria assembled a treasure unlike any the world had ever seen. This wasn't gold or jewels, it was knowledge. More than 30,000 clay tablets, meticulously organized and catalogued, filled the shelves of his royal library, creating the world's first systematic collection of written works. While other rulers boasted of conquests and monuments, Ashurbanipal took pride in something far more enduring: the preservation of Mesopotamia's greatest minds. From epic poetry to medical texts, astronomical charts to legal decrees, his library was a time capsule of human thought, safeguarding civilizations that might otherwise have been lost to the ages. What made Ashurbanipal's collection so revolutionary wasn't just its scale, it was its purpose. Unlike earlier repositories of texts, which often served as temple archives or administrative records, this library was designed for study and reference. Scribes scoured the empire, copying ancient works onto fresh tablets, while others annotated and translated obscure passages. The king himself, a rare literate monarch, reportedly contributed to the effort, personally collecting rare manuscripts. Among the library's most famous holdings was the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest surviving work of literature, whose tales of heroism and mortality still resonate today. But it wasn't just poetry. Medical tablets detailed surgeries and herbal remedies, while mathematical texts solved complex equations, proving Mesopotamian scholars had grasped concepts like quadratic equations millennia before modern mathematicians. The library's survival strategy was as ingenious as its contents. Clay tablets, though fragile when wet, became virtually indestructible when fired, a fact that saved countless texts when Nineveh fell to invaders in 612 BC. As the city burned, the heat baked the tablets solid, preserving them for archaeologists to unearth 2,500 years later. Without this accidental kiln, we might never have known the depth of Mesopotamian astronomy, which tracked planetary movements with startling accuracy, or their legal innovations like the concept of presumption of innocence. Even mundane records, shopping lists, divorce settlements, or complaints about bad copper paint a vivid portrait of daily life in the world's first cities. Yet the library's true legacy lies in its defiance of time. When Assyria crumbled, its enemies tried to erase its memory, leveling palaces and smashing statues. But words, once written, have a way of outlasting empires. Ashurbanipal's collection became a bridge across centuries, connecting modern scholars to the scribes of Babylon and Sumer. It proved that knowledge, when curated with care, could transcend the rise and fall of kingdoms, offering later generations, including our own, a chance to peer into the minds of those who came before. In a world where so much ancient wisdom has vanished, Ashurbanipal's library stands as a testament to the power of preservation, reminding us that the greatest treasures aren't always the ones that glitter, but the ones that speak. For centuries, Egyptian pharaohs had gazed southward with a mix of awe and apprehension toward the land they called Kush, a kingdom rich in gold, warriors, and an ancient culture that rivaled their own. Then, in a stunning reversal of history, the tables turned. Around 740 BC, it wasn't Egyptians marching into Nubia, but Nubian kings crossing the desert northward to claim the throne of the Nile. The Kushite ruler Pi launched a campaign that would see his dynasty, the 25th, rule Egypt for nearly a century, shattering stereotypes of African inferiority that would later cloud their legacy. Pi's conquest wasn't a raid or a fleeting occupation, it was a deliberate cultural takeover. The Kushites didn't just seize power, they embraced it, adopting the titles and trappings of pharaohs while infusing Egyptian traditions with their own. At Napata, their capital near the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal, they built temples echoing Egyptian design but adorned with distinctly Kushite flair. The most striking evidence of their reverence for Egypt, they restored neglected monuments and revived religious practices that had faded under fragmented rule, positioning themselves not as destroyers, but as custodians of a civilization they deeply admired. But the Kushites were more than mere imitators. Their reign heralded an artistic renaissance, blending Egyptian precision with Nubian vitality. Statues of Pharaoh Taharqa, Pi's successor, show him with the muscular build and round face typical of Kushite rulers, yet draped in the regalia of a traditional Egyptian king. Under his rule, Egypt witnessed a burst of construction, from the soaring columns of the Temple of Ammon at Kawa to fortresses guarding the Nile's bends. Even more remarkably, Taharqa's armies pushed back against the expanding Assyrian Empire, proving Kushite military might on an international stage. Their downfall came as dramatically as their rise. The Assyrians, armed with iron weapons and relentless siege tactics, overwhelmed Taharqa's forces, driving the Kushites back to their homeland. Yet their retreat wasn't the end of their story. In Nubia, free from foreign threats, they entered a golden age. The city of Meroe became a new capital where Kushite culture flourished independently of Egypt. Here, they developed their own script, worshipped lion gods, and traded with distant powers like Rome and India. The legacy of the Kushite pharaohs is a testament to the complexity of ancient African power. They weren't outsiders looting a superior civilization. They were its students, its champions, and ultimately, its successors. For too long, their story was downplayed, their achievements folded into Egypt's narrative or dismissed as derivative. But the truth is far richer. These rulers proved that greatness wasn't confined to one side of the Mediterranean or the other. It could rise, brilliant and unapologetic, from the heart of Africa itself. 500 years before the Vikings or the Age of Exploration, an audacious voyage unfolded, one that would challenge everything the ancient world thought possible. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, a crew of Phoenician sailors, commissioned by the Egyptian pharaoh Necho II around 600 BC, accomplished the unthinkable. They circumnavigated Africa. At the time, the claim was met with skepticism, even ridicule. Who could believe that a ship could sail beyond the known world, around a continent whose true size was a mystery, and return alive? Yet modern scholars, piecing together fragments of evidence, now argue this forgotten journey wasn't just a myth. It may have been one of history's greatest feats of navigation. The Phoenicians were no ordinary sailors. Hailing from the coastal cities of modern-day Lebanon, they were the ancient Mediterranean's master mariners, their ships laden with purple dye, glass, and cedar wood, traversing routes from Spain to the Levant. But Necho's request pushed them beyond familiar horizons. Herodotus recounts how the Phoenicians set sail from the Red Sea, heading south along Africa's eastern coast. For months they inched forward, their progress marked by a surreal detail. As they rounded the continent's southern tip, the sun unthinkably appeared on their right in the northern sky. This observation, dismissed as fiction for centuries, is now hailed as proof. In the southern hemisphere, the sun's position would indeed shift northward, a detail the Phoenicians couldn't have fabricated if they hadn't witnessed it firsthand. The voyage wasn't just a test of endurance, it was a logistical marvel. The crew reportedly stopped each autumn to plant crops, waiting for harvest before continuing, turning the journey into a multi-year odyssey. When they finally re-entered the Mediterranean through the Pillars of Hercules, today's Strait of Gibraltar, they had completed a loop of nearly 15,000 miles. Yet their achievement was overshadowed by disbelief. Herodotus, ever the skeptic, wrote, "They made a statement which I do not believe," dismissing the sun's shifting position as nonsense. Even the Egyptians, despite commissioning the journey, seemed uninterested in repeating it, leaving the feat to fade into obscurity. The real tragedy isn't just that the voyage was forgotten, it's what its dismissal cost the ancient world. Had the journey been celebrated, maps might have been redrawn centuries earlier, trade routes expanded, and the true scale of Africa revealed. Instead, the story became a footnote, a curious tale whispered among historians. Only in the 20th century, as scholars re-examined Phoenician shipbuilding and navigation techniques, did the pieces click. Their vessels with sturdy hulls and single sails were capable of such a journey. Their knowledge of currents and winds, honed over generations, made them the only civilization of their era equipped for the attempt. What's haunting is how close we came to losing this story entirely. No Phoenician records survive. Their writings, often on perishable papyrus, crumbled to dust. We rely on a Greek historian's second-hand account, a threadbare lifeline to an achievement that reshaped humanity's understanding of the possible. The voyage stands as a testament not just to the Phoenicians' skill, but to the fragility of history itself. How many other milestones, equally staggering, have vanished without a trace? The circumnavigation of Africa reminds us that the past is full of quiet revolutions, moments when someone dared to go farther, see more, and in doing so changed the world, even if no one believed them. Stretching from the bustling capital of Susa in Persia all the way to the Aegean coast of Anatolia, the Royal Road was an engineering marvel of its time, a ribbon of packed earth and stone spanning over 1,500 miles. Built under the rule of Darius the Great around the 5th century BCE, this wasn't just a path for merchants or travelers, it was the lifeblood of an empire, a highway designed to bind distant provinces together with unprecedented speed and efficiency. For the first time in history, messages could race from one end of a continent to another in days rather than months, thanks to a relay system of fresh horses and couriers stationed at intervals along the route. Herodotus, ever the chronicler of wonders, wrote with awe about these riders, who neither snow nor rain nor heat could stop from completing their appointed rounds, a phrase that might sound familiar, as it later inspired the motto of modern postal services. What made the Royal Road truly revolutionary wasn't just its length, but its purpose. Unlike earlier roads, which often meandered between villages or sacred sites, this was infrastructure as political strategy. Darius didn't just want to move goods, he needed to control an empire that stretched from the Nile to the Indus. Rebellions had to be crushed quickly, taxes collected reliably, and decrees disseminated without delay. The road's carefully planned stations, or chaparcane, functioned like ancient rest stops, offering food, fresh mounts, and even lodging for officials. Couriers carrying sealed tablets could cover the entire distance in just 7 days, a pace that would have been unimaginable without this network. For comparison, the same journey on foot would have taken 3 months. The Persians had effectively invented the first high-speed information superhighway. Trade flourished alongside governance. Caravans laden with Babylonian textiles, Indian spices, and Greek silver trundled along the road, their routes safeguarded by imperial garrisons. The safety and predictability of the Royal Road lowered the risks of long-distance commerce, encouraging merchants to venture farther than ever before. Towns sprouted at key junctions, their markets buzzing with languages and currencies from across the known world. The road even standardized weights and measures, a quiet innovation that reduced conflicts and fraud, proving that infrastructure isn't just about physical connections, it's about creating trust across cultures. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Royal Road, though, was its influence on future empires. Rome, often celebrated for its own vast network of roads, owed a clear debt to Persian ingenuity. The Via Appia and other Roman highways adopted similar principles: straight paths for speed, regular way stations, and a focus on military and administrative control. Even the Mongol Empire's Yam system, with its relay riders, echoed Darius's vision millennia later. The Royal Road was more than a feat of engineering. It was a blueprint for how to rule a vast territory, proving that the real power of an empire lies not just in its armies, but in its ability to move information faster than its rivals. Yet for all its brilliance, the Royal Road also reveals a paradox of ancient infrastructure. Built to last, it was ultimately as fragile as the empire it served. When Persia fell to Alexander the Great, the road persisted, but without the centralized maintenance and security of Darius's administration, sections fell into disrepair. The lesson was clear: even the grandest systems rely on the stability of the civilizations that create them. Today, fragments of the Royal Road linger as faint traces in the landscapes of Iran and Turkey, a ghostly reminder that the greatest innovations often leave the quietest ruins. What endures, though, is the idea that connection is the foundation of power, and that the paths we build can outlast the empires that paved them. Long before the cloak and dagger intrigues of medieval Europe or the Cold War spy games, ancient India perfected the art of espionage under the Mauryan Empire. Chandragupta Maurya, the empire's founder, didn't just rely on armies to secure his throne. He built an intricate web of spies so sophisticated it would make modern intelligence agencies take notes. At the heart of this system was the Arthashastra, a manual of statecraft written by his advisor Kautilya, which detailed espionage techniques so advanced they remain startlingly relevant even today. The Mauryan spy network wasn't a handful of informants whispering in shadows. It was a meticulously organized institution. Agents were categorized by their roles, from sancharas who infiltrated enemy courts disguised as diplomats to eudasthetas who posed as ascetics, blending into temples to gather rumors. Female spies, known as Vishakanyas, sometimes used poison or seduction to eliminate threats, while merchant doubles moved between kingdoms, their trade caravans hiding coded messages. What set Chandragupta's system apart was its scale and professionalism. Spies weren't just occasional tools, they were a permanent bureaucracy, trained in languages, forgery, and cryptography, funded by the state to operate year-round. Kautilya's Arthashastra reveals the chilling pragmatism behind this network. One passage advises rulers to employ spies from childhood, raising orphans as loyal agents unaware of their true purpose. Another recommends planting sleeper spies in rival courts for years before activating them. Perhaps most striking is the emphasis on counterintelligence. Mauryan spies were tasked with infiltrating their own ranks to root out traitors, a practice echoing modern mole hunts. The text even outlines psychological warfare, suggesting agents spread disinformation to destabilize enemies without drawing a sword. The empire's success hinged on this invisible machinery. When Alexander the Great's generals threatened India's northwest, Chandragupta's spies provided real-time troop movements and supply line weaknesses. Later, they exposed plots among his own governors, preventing rebellions before they began. But the system's brilliance also lay in its duality. Spies weren't just saboteurs. They acted as early census takers, gauging public sentiment to help administrators address grievances before they sparked unrest. In essence, they were both the empire's eyes and its conscience. What's remarkable is how little this system relied on technology. Without satellites or wiretaps, the Mauryans built an intelligence web spanning thousands of miles using nothing but human cunning and meticulous planning. Their methods influenced espionage traditions across Asia, from the Gupta Empire to medieval Sri Lanka. Even today, historians debate whether Chandragupta's reliance on spies was paranoia or genius, but the results speak for themselves. His empire became the first to unify most of the Indian subcontinent, a feat unlikely without the silent, unseen work of those who moved through the darkness to keep the realm intact. The Mauryans proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't an army, it's a well-placed whisper. Rome had never known fear like this. For centuries, the young republic had been expanding its influence across the Italian peninsula, its disciplined legions crushing rival tribes and cities with growing confidence. But in 390 BCE, an unstoppable force arrived at the city gates, not a rival Italian power, but a horde of towering, fair-haired warriors from the north. The Gauls, a Celtic people whose name would become synonymous with terror in Roman minds, descended upon the city with a ferocity no one had anticipated. They swept aside the hastily assembled Roman defense at the Allia River, their long swords flashing as they cut through ranks of poorly positioned infantry. Within days, the unthinkable happened. Rome itself fell, its sacred heart plundered by foreigners for the first time in its history. The sack of Rome wasn't just a military defeat, it was a psychological earthquake. The Gauls, led by the chieftain Brennus, ransacked the city for months, demanding a massive ransom of gold to leave. Legend claims that as the Romans weighed out the payment, they protested the Gauls using rigged scales. Brennus, in a moment of chilling bravado, threw his sword onto the balance with the words "Vi victis," woe to the conquered. The phrase became a scar on Rome's collective memory, a brutal lesson in the price of weakness. Yet the humiliation didn't end there. The Gauls had bypassed the Capitoline Hill, where a handful of defenders held out, only because their scouts were distracted by a flock of geese sacred to Juno. A twist of fate the Romans later spun into a tale of divine intervention, masking the sheer luck that spared their last stronghold. This catastrophe forced Rome to confront its vulnerabilities head-on. The old militia system, where citizen soldiers farmed part of the year and fought the rest, had proven disastrous against the Gauls' professional ferocity. In response, Rome overhauled its military entirely. The phalanx formation, inherited from the Greeks, was abandoned for the more flexible manipular legion, organized into smaller units that could adapt to rugged terrain. Soldiers were equipped with better armor and the gladius, a short, thrusting sword ideal for close combat. Most importantly, Rome began constructing the Servian walls, massive fortifications that would deter future invasions, a project born from raw necessity. But the sack's impact went deeper than tactics and stone. It forged a new Roman mentality, one that blended pragmatism with relentless ambition. Never again would Rome allow itself to be so vulnerable. The event became a rallying cry, invoked for centuries to justify preemptive wars and ruthless expansion. When Julius Caesar launched his conquest of Gaul 400 years later, his propaganda framed it as vengeance for that ancient disgrace. Even the Gauls' eventual assimilation into the empire couldn't erase the trauma. Rome's nightmares of barbarian hordes at the gates persisted until the very fall of the Western Empire. What's often overlooked is how the sack reshaped Rome's identity internationally. Before 390 BC, Rome was just another rising power in Italy. Afterward, its near destruction and dramatic recovery became a cornerstone of its legend, proof of its divine favor and unyielding resilience. Later historians, like Livy, embellished the story with tales of senatorial elders refusing to flee, sitting calmly in their robes as Gauls entered the Forum, a portrait of stoic dignity in the face of ruin. Whether fact or myth, these narratives served a purpose. They transformed a moment of abject defeat into a testament of Rome's inevitable greatness. The Gauls left Rome in ashes, but from those ashes rose a city, and eventually an empire hardened by the experience. The sack wasn't an ending, it was the crucible that forged the military and psychological tools Rome would use to dominate the Mediterranean. Few events so humiliating have ever yielded such a transformative legacy. The Celts taught Rome how to fall, and in doing so showed it how to rise stronger than before. While the Library of Alexandria burns bright in our collective memory as the ancient world's greatest repository of knowledge, it was far from alone. Across the Mediterranean and Near East, rival institutions flourished, their shelves groaning under the weight of scrolls and tablets that preserved the intellectual treasures of lost civilizations. Take the Library of Pergamon, nestled in what's now Turkey. Founded in the 3rd century BC by the Attalid dynasty, this wasn't just a collection, it was a statement. The kings of Pergamon wanted a cultural jewel to rival Alexandria, and they built it with ruthless ingenuity. When Egypt banned the export of papyrus to stifle competition, Pergamon scholars didn't flinch. They perfected parchment, a durable writing material made from treated animal skins, so superior that the word pergamon, literally from Pergamon, evolved into our modern term parchment. Their library became a magnet for thinkers, housing 200,000 scrolls and pioneering innovations like classified shelves. and a dedicated research hall where scholars could pore over texts under the watchful eyes of marble statues depicting the great minds of Greece. Then there was Antioch, the dazzling capital of the Seleucid Empire. Its library, though less documented, was no less ambitious. Positioned at the crossroads of Persian, Greek, and Mesopotamian thought, Antioch's collection specialized in translating and synthesizing knowledge from across the known world. Unlike Alexandria's focus on Greek texts, Antioch embraced multilingualism, curating works in Aramaic, Persian, and even early Hebrew. This was a place where Babylonian astronomy met Aristotelian philosophy, where medical texts from India were copied alongside Syrian poetry. Tragically, Antioch's library, like so many others, vanished not in a single fiery catastrophe, but through the slow erosion of time, its scrolls crumbling into dust as the city's fortunes waned. Further east, the Sasanian Empire's Academy of Gondashapur in Persia became a beacon of learning when much of the West was descending into the so-called Dark Ages. Founded in the 3rd century CE, Gondashapur wasn't just a library but a full-fledged university, attracting scholars expelled from Athens when Emperor Justinian shuttered its philosophical schools. Here, Nestorian Christians, exiled for their beliefs, translated Greek medical texts into Syriac and Arabic, preserving works that would later fuel the Islamic Golden Age. The Academy's greatest innovation, its hospital where theories from scrolls were tested in practice, blending Greek, Indian, and Persian medicine into something entirely new. What's striking about these forgotten libraries isn't just their diversity, it's how they reflect the intellectual ecosystems of their time. Alexandria may have been the most famous, but Pergamon thrived through adaptation, Antioch through synthesis, and Gondashapur through reinvention. Each responded to unique challenges, political rivalries, material shortages, even religious persecutions, yet all shared a common purpose: to guard the fragile flame of knowledge against the winds of change. Their stories remind us that the transmission of ideas in antiquity wasn't a single thread but a vast, interwoven tapestry, frayed in places but unbroken. The real tragedy is how few of these institutions' physical traces remain. While Alexandria's destruction dominates popular imagination, the quiet disappearances of Pergamon's scrolls, Antioch's multilingual archives, and Gondashapur's medical texts represent losses just as profound. Yet their influence lingers in unexpected ways. The parchment perfected in Pergamon became medieval Europe's writing medium of choice, preserving everything from biblical texts to Carolingian law. Antioch's translational ethos laid groundwork for the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, while Gondashapur's medical manuals resurfaced centuries later in Moorish Spain. These libraries didn't just store knowledge, they shaped its very survival, proving that sometimes the most enduring legacies are those that work in silence, far from the spotlight of legend. High in the rugged mountains of Central Asia, far from the olive groves of Greece, a remarkable kingdom defied geography and expectation. The Bactrian Greeks, descendants of Alexander the Great's farthest-flung settlers, carved out a civilization where the philosophies of Socrates and the teachings of the Buddha coexisted in ways that would have stunned their Mediterranean ancestors. This wasn't just a remote colonial outpost, it was a cultural laboratory, a place where Hellenistic statues wore draped tunics while meditating in the lotus position, and where Greek playwrights staged dramas for audiences who prayed at stupas instead of temples. The story begins with Alexander's brutal but brief conquest of Bactria in the 4th century BCE. When his empire fractured after his death, this distant territory fell to his general Seleucus, who struggled to hold it against nomadic incursions and rebellious satraps. By 250 BC, the region broke free entirely, ruled by a line of Greek kings with names like Demetrius and Eucratides who minted coins bearing their faces alongside Greek gods. What's astonishing isn't just that they survived, it's how they thrived. Bactria became a crossroads of the ancient world, its cities brimming with Greek-style theaters and gymnasiums, yet its markets bustling with traders from India, China, and Persia. The Greco-Bactrians didn't cling to nostalgia, they adapted, blending Athenian aesthetics with Central Asian pragmatism. Nowhere is this fusion more breathtaking than in Gandhara art. Imagine a statue of the Buddha, serene and contemplative, but carved with the precise musculature of a Greek athlete, his robes falling in Hellenistic folds so realistic they seem to flutter in an unseen breeze. This wasn't mere artistic borrowing, it was a theological revolution. Before Gandhara, Buddhist art relied on symbols like footprints or empty thrones to represent the Buddha's presence. The Greco-Bactrians introduced the concept of depicting him in human form, drawing on Apollo's idealized features to give shape to enlightenment itself. The result, a visual language that would eventually spread across Asia, from the caves of Dunhuang to the temples of Kyoto. Yet the kingdom's true genius lay in its pluralism. Greek philosophers debated alongside Buddhist monks in the streets of Ai Khanum, an excavated city where archaeologists found gymnasium inscriptions quoting Delphi's oracle just miles from Vedic fire altars. The Greco-Bactrians didn't see contradiction in honoring Zeus and the Buddha, they saw harmony, a chance to weave threads from disparate traditions into something entirely new. Even their downfall, when it came, was poetic. Overrun by nomadic tribes like the Yuezhi around 130 BC, the kingdom vanished from history, but its legacy lived on in the Kushan Empire, which inherited and expanded its artistic and spiritual synthesis. What makes the Greco-Bactrian experiment so poignant is its fragility. Unlike Rome or Persia, whose influences echo loudly through history, this was a quiet revolution, one that could have been erased entirely by time. Only in the 19th century, when British archaeologists uncovered Greek-style coins in Afghan soil, did the world remember this forgotten chapter. Today, as the last Gandhara statues risk destruction by war and looting, their survival feels like a miracle, a whisper from a world where East and West didn't collide but embraced, proving that the most enduring cultures aren't those that conquer but those that blend. Etched into the arid plains of southern Peru, the Nazca lines stretch across nearly 200 square miles, a gallery of giant spiders, hummingbirds, and geometric shapes so vast they can only be fully appreciated from the sky. These geoglyphs, carved between 500 BC and 500 CE, by removing the dark surface stones to reveal lighter earth beneath, have baffled scholars for decades. Who created these colossal artworks, and more importantly, why? The theories surrounding their purpose range from the scientifically plausible to the wildly speculative, each offering a glimpse into the minds of a culture that left no written records behind. One of the earliest and most enduring explanations ties the lines to astronomy. In the 1960s, mathematician Maria Reich proposed that many of the glyphs aligned with celestial events, serving as a massive agricultural calendar. The Nazca, living in one of the driest places on Earth, may have used these alignments to predict seasonal rains or track the movement of stars critical for planting. Certain lines do correspond with solstice sunrises, while others point to constellations like the Pleiades, which Andean cultures associated with water and fertility. Yet critics argue the matches aren't precise enough to confirm intentional design, leaving room for alternative interpretations. Another compelling theory suggests the lines formed sacred pathways for rituals. Archaeologists have uncovered pottery fragments and ceremonial platforms along some glyphs, hinting at processions or dances performed atop them. The act of walking these paths may have held spiritual significance, perhaps as a form of communication with deities or ancestors. Some researchers even propose the lines were meant to be seen not by humans, but by God's monumental prayers etched into the landscape itself. This idea gains traction when considering the Nazca's reliance on scarce water sources. Creating such labor-intensive art could have been a desperate plea for life-giving rain. Then there are the more controversial takes. Erich von Däniken's infamous ancient astronauts hypothesis claimed the lines were landing strips for extraterrestrial visitors, a notion popularized in the 1970s but thoroughly debunked by scholars. Less fantastical but equally debated is the water mapping theory, which posits that the lines trace underground aquifers, acting as a guide to precious water sources. Recent satellite studies have shown correlations between some geoglyphs and subterranean water channels, though whether this was intentional remains uncertain. What's often overlooked is the sheer diversity of the glyphs themselves. While animals and plants dominate popular imagination, over 70% of the lines are simple geometric forms: triangles, spirals, trapezoids, some stretching over a mile long. These shapes may have served as territorial markers, clan symbols, or even early forms of writing. The hummingbird, for instance, appears in Nazca textiles and pottery, suggesting it held cultural importance beyond mere decoration. The true genius of the Nazca lines lies in their engineering. Despite centuries of erosion and seismic activity, the glyphs remain remarkably intact, preserved by the region's unique climate, a near-rainless environment where winds sweep away dust rather than depositing it. The Nazca achieved this precision using simple tools and surveying techniques, possibly employing grids of ropes and stakes to scale up small designs. Their ability to create such enduring art without modern technology speaks to a sophistication we're only beginning to appreciate. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of the Nazca lines is their silence. Unlike pyramids or temples, they offer no inscriptions, no artifacts, just the questions they provoke. Were they a celestial map, a sacred canvas, or something else entirely? The answer may lie in the landscape itself, where every line, every curve is a whisper from a people who sought to make their mark not on paper but on the earth. And in that, they succeeded beyond measure. Their messages may be coded, but their ambition is clear: to reach beyond their time, to be remembered. And for that, at least, we can say, mission accomplished. When Carthage ruled the waves as the Mediterranean's greatest maritime power, one of its admirals embarked on a journey so daring it would be centuries before Europeans matched it. Hanno the Navigator, a name now whispered more in archaeology circles than history books, didn't just sail beyond the Pillars of Hercules. He ventured into what his contemporaries called the Ocean of Darkness, returning with tales that straddled the line between myth and groundbreaking discovery. Commissioned around 500 BC to establish colonies along Africa's Atlantic coast, his expedition did far more than plant flags in the sand. It brought back the first recorded encounter with what might have been gorillas described as hairy wild men who threw stones, and documented an erupting volcano, possibly Mount Cameroon, glowing like a beacon in the night. The voyage wasn't merely an adventure, it was a logistical masterpiece. Hanno's fleet, reportedly 60 ships strong, carried thousands of settlers, supplies, and the ambition to stretch Carthage's influence beyond the known world. Sailing south along the Moroccan coast, they founded trading posts like Cerne, possibly modern-day Essaouira, before pushing into uncharted waters. The surviving account, etched onto a temple plaque in Carthage and later translated by Greek scholars, reads like an ancient travelogue. Lagoons teeming with crocodiles, nights illuminated by fires that reached the stars, and encounters with nomadic tribes who worshipped no gods but the sun. Most startling is the description of the Gorillai, creatures so aggressive that Hanno's men captured 3, only for the animals to bite and claw so fiercely they were killed. Their skins, the text claims, brought back to Carthage as curiosities. What makes Hanno's journey extraordinary isn't just the distances covered, but the scientific curiosity it reveals. Unlike later explorers who sought conquest or gold, Hanno meticulously recorded geography, wildlife, and even lava flows, an early example of proto-scientific observation. His notes on the volcano's eruption predate Pliny the Elder's descriptions of Vesuvius by over 500 years. And while some dismiss the gorilla as misidentified chimpanzees or tribal people embellished by Greek translators, the detail of their defiance not as mindless beasts but as creatures who could not be led away quietly suggests an encounter far more nuanced than mere myth. Yet for all its brilliance, the expedition's legacy was nearly erased. Rome's destruction of Carthage in 146 BC scattered its records, leaving only second-hand Greek summaries. Later European explorers, convinced they were the first to discover Africa's west coast, ignored or dismissed Hanno's account. Even today, historians debate how far south he reached Senegal, Gabon, but the physical evidence is tantalizing. Pottery fragments matching Carthaginian designs have surfaced as far south as the Canary Islands, while linguistic traces in coastal tribal languages hint at long-lost trade contact. Hanno's story forces us to reconsider the narrative of exploration itself. Here was a navigator who charted African coasts while Greeks still clung to their Aegean shores, who documented volcanic activity with the precision of a naturalist millennia before Darwin. His voyage wasn't just a Carthaginian achievement, it was a human one, proving that curiosity and courage aren't bound by era or empire. And perhaps that's why his name faded, not because his feats were small, but because they were so far ahead of their time that the world simply wasn't ready to remember. Before Rome stamped its identity onto the ancient world, it was a student, not a teacher, learning at the feet of a far older, more sophisticated neighbor, the Etruscans. This enigmatic civilization, flourishing in what's now Tuscany long before Romulus supposedly founded Rome, didn't just share a border with the fledgling city, they shaped its soul. From the very bricks of Rome's temples to the blood-soaked sands of its arenas, the Etruscan fingerprint is everywhere, a silent testament to a culture that conquered its conquerors in ways no army ever could. Start with the sacred. The Romans prided themselves on their piety, but the gods they worshipped often bore Etruscan DNA: Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. The heart of Rome's divine pantheon were borrowed directly from the Etruscan triad of Tinia, Uni, and Minerva. Even the rituals felt familiar. The art of divination, where priests scrutinized lightning strikes or the entrails of sacrificed animals for omens, was an Etruscan import. The haruspices, Rome's official fortune-tellers, traced their craft back to Etruscan netzvis, specialists who could read the will of the gods in a sheep's liver. Most strikingly, the Capitoline Temple, Rome's spiritual epicenter, was built by Etruscan craftsmen in a distinct style featuring deep porches and terracotta statues, a far cry from the austere Greek designs Rome would later favor. Then there's the spectacle. The gladiatorial games, synonymous with Rome's bloodlust, began as an Etruscan funeral rite. Tomb paintings from the 7th century BC show masked warriors dueling to honor the dead, a practice the Romans initially adopted for aristocratic funerals before turning it into mass entertainment. Even the word arena may derive from the Etruscan harina, meaning sand, used to soak up blood. The iconic Roman toga, another Etruscan gift evolving from the tebena, a draped cloak worn by their nobles. Rome's early kings, including the semi-legendary Tarquin dynasty, were Etruscan rulers who introduced urban planning, drainage systems, and even the concept of the triumphal procession where victorious generals paraded through the city like gods. Architecture tells the same story. The Etruscans pioneered the arch, a structural marvel the Romans would later perfect. Their cities boasted paved roads and sophisticated aqueducts centuries before Rome's engineering feats. Walk through the ruins of an Etruscan necropolis like Cerveteri, and you'll see tomb facades resembling aristocratic homes, complete with carved furniture and frescoed walls, suggesting a belief in the afterlife so vivid it likely influenced Rome's own funerary practices. The famous Cloaca Maxima, Rome's monumental sewer system, built under Etruscan kings using techniques honed in their cities, yet history is written by the victors. As Rome grew powerful, it systematically erased its debt to the Etruscans, painting them as decadent and foreign. By the 1st century BC, the Etruscan language was fading, their texts destroyed or ignored. But culture has a way of outliving politics. Even after Rome absorbed Etruria into its empire, Etruscan soothsayers remained sought-after advisors, their rituals embedded in state ceremonies. The very symbols of Roman power, the fasces, the magistrate's chair, the purple-bordered toga, were Etruscan in origin, repurposed as Roman icons. The irony is delicious. Rome, which would later pride itself on civilizing barbarians, was itself civilized by a people it eventually subdued. The Etruscans never built an empire to match Rome's, but their legacy proved more durable than borders or armies. They taught Rome how to worship, how to build, even how to revel, lessons so deeply absorbed that Romans forgot they were borrowed. In the end, the Etruscans didn't just influence Rome, they became Rome, their innovations so seamlessly woven into the fabric of the empire that their origins blurred into myth. And perhaps that's the most profound conquest of all, not by sword, but by sheer cultural osmosis. Long before the term globalization entered our vocabulary, an intrepid Chinese diplomat set in motion one of history's most transformative networks, not through conquest but through curiosity. Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty, ruling a vast and insular China, grew increasingly wary of nomadic Xiongnu tribes raiding his borders. Desperate for allies, he dispatched a court official named Zhang Qian westward in 138 BC on what seemed a straightforward mission: recruit the distant Yuezhi people to fight beside him. What unfolded instead was an odyssey of survival, diplomacy, and accidental discovery that would redraw the world's economic map forever. Zhang Qian's journey was anything but smooth. Captured by the Xiongnu almost immediately, he spent 10 grueling years in captivity before escaping, only to press onward toward his goal. When he finally reached the Yuezhi in modern-day Uzbekistan, they'd settled comfortably and had no interest in revisiting old battles. Yet what Zhang Qian brought back to China in 126 BC was far more valuable than a military alliance. It was knowledge. He described bustling markets in Bactria filled with goods China had never seen: grapes, walnuts, and most tantalizingly, sturdy Central Asian horses larger than any bred in the East. Even more striking were his accounts of sophisticated civilizations beyond the barbarian lands Parthia with its silver coins, and farther still, a mysterious empire called Dakin that scholars now believe was Rome. Emperor Wu, a ruler with both vision and appetite for luxury, recognized the potential immediately. If China couldn't secure allies, it could dominate trade. The Silk Road, as we now call it, wasn't a single path but a shifting web of routes stretching 4,000 miles, where camels replaced ships as the cargo vessels of the arid steppes. Chinese silks, lighter than gold yet as valuable, flowed west to adorn Roman senators, while glassware, jade, and exotic spices trickled east. But the trade wasn't merely material, it was cultural. Buddhism rode these routes into China, carried by monks and merchants. Paper-making, a closely guarded Chinese secret, eventually leaked westward, revolutionizing record-keeping from Samarkand to Alexandria. The road's impact rippled far beyond economics. To protect its caravans, the Han Dynasty expanded aggressively westward, establishing garrison towns like Dunhuang, where desert caves would one day hide the breathtaking Buddhist library of the Mogao Grottos. The Parthians, middlemen between east and west, grew fabulously wealthy, controlling key segments of the route, while Roman elites grumbled about their silver draining east to pay for silks, straining their economy. Perhaps most surprising was the road's role in disease transmission. Historians believe the first devastating outbreaks of bubonic plague traveled these very trade networks, a grim reminder of interconnectedness's cost. Zhang Qian, the man who started it all, never saw the full fruits of his suffering, yet his legacy outshone any battlefield victory. The Silk Road became antiquity's internet, a slow, unpredictable, but astonishingly effective means of exchanging goods, ideas, and even genes across continents. When archaeologists uncover Han-era coins in British soil or Roman glass in Chinese tombs, they're touching the echoes of his footsteps. Emperor Wu's gamble on a single envoy didn't just open a trade route, it stitched together a world, proving that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin not with a sword but with a traveler's tale. Rome had met its match not in an empire but in one man, a king so obsessed with poisons that he turned his own body into a weapon. Mithridates VI of Pontus, a name that struck terror into Roman hearts, wasn't just another defiant ruler. He was a brilliant, brutal tactician who spent his life preparing for one goal: to outlast Rome. From childhood, he'd been fed whispers of assassination plots, his father allegedly poisoned by his own mother. So he became the toxin's master, ingesting tiny doses of every known venom until he developed an immunity so legendary that even today, we call the practice Mithridatism. But his real genius lay in how he weaponized that knowledge, creating an arsenal of antidotes and biological traps that turned every Roman advance into a potential death sentence. When war finally erupted in 88 BC, Mithridates didn't just fight Rome, he dismantled its playbook. While legions relied on disciplined formations, he orchestrated a guerrilla campaign spanning mountain passes and coastlines, leveraging Pontus's rugged terrain to ambush supply lines. His most devastating strike came early. In a single night, he ordered the massacre of 80,000 Roman citizens across Asia Minor, a calculated act of psychological warfare that severed local cities from any hope of reconciliation with Rome. Yet what truly set him apart was his scientific ruthlessness. Historians like Appian describe Pontic archers dipping arrows in a cocktail of snake venoms and rotting blood, creating wounds that wouldn't heal. Roman soldiers told stories of wells poisoned with hellebore, and entire villages rigged with toxic honey, a trick borrowed from Xenophon's ancient accounts of mad honey that induced hallucinations. The Romans, accustomed to crushing enemies in open battle, found themselves in a nightmare. Even when generals like Sulla and Pompey won victories, Mithridates would vanish into the Caucasus, regrouping with new allies from Armenia to Crimea. He spoke 22 languages, allowing him to weave alliances among tribes Rome had never subdued. His navy, manned by pirates Rome had failed to eradicate, controlled the Black Sea like a private moat. At one point, he even attempted to orchestrate a grand barbarian invasion of Italy from the north, a plan that might have worked had betrayal not unraveled it. Mithridates' greatest legacy, though, lies in his defiance of inevitability. While other kingdoms fell quickly to Rome's might, Pontus held out for over 25 years across 3 grueling wars. His resistance was so formidable that Pompey's triumph parade featured a portrait of him in gold, a rare honor for an enemy. And when cornered at last in 63 BC, he chose a final act of control. After years of building immunity, suicide by poison failed, forcing him to order a bodyguard to run him through with a sword. The Poison King's shadow lingered long after his death. His personal recipes for antidotes, compiled into secret texts, were carried to Rome as spoils of war, where emperors like Nero reportedly studied them. Modern toxicologists still debate whether his famed universal antidote, a mix of 54 ingredients including opium and chopped vipers, held any real merit. But the deeper lesson wasn't medical, it was psychological. Mithridates proved that Rome wasn't invincible, that a single determined mind could exploit its arrogance and inertia. In an era of brute force, he waged war like a scientist, turning chemistry and psychology into weapons. And though Rome eventually erased his kingdom, it never quite erased the fear he inspired, that even an empire might be poisoned drop by drop. Rising from the highlands of northern Ethiopia, the towering obelisks of Axum stand as silent sentinels of an empire that once dominated the crossroads of Africa and Arabia. These monolithic stelae, some reaching over 100 feet tall, weren't just monuments, they were declarations, carved from single blocks of granite and adorned with false doors and intricate carvings. They marked the tombs of kings in a kingdom that rivaled Rome and Persia in wealth and ambition. The Aksumite Empire, flourishing between the 1st and 7th centuries CE, controlled trade routes linking the Mediterranean to India, minted its own gold coins, and even left its mark on the Bible as one of the first Christian kingdoms. But its greatest legacy might be these stone giants, whose precision and scale still baffle engineers today. What's astonishing about the Aksumite stelae isn't just their height, it's the logistics behind them. The granite was quarried over 2 miles from their final sites, requiring laborers to transport blocks weighing hundreds of tons without wheels or pulleys. Scholars speculate they used a combination of ramps, sledges, and brute force, possibly lubricating the path with water to reduce friction. The largest obelisk, now collapsed, would have rivaled Rome's Lateran obelisk, proving Aksum's builders were every bit as skilled as their Mediterranean counterparts. But unlike Egyptian obelisks which glorified pharaohs as gods, Aksum's stelae served a dual purpose. They were both tombstones and cosmic bridges, their designs mirroring the multi-story palaces of the living, as if the dead kings inside still presided over earthly realms. Aksum's influence stretched far beyond its stonemasonry. By the 4th century, King Azana converted to Christianity decades before Rome embraced it under Constantine, making Aksum one of the earliest states to adopt the faith. The empire's coins, inscribed with crosses and Greek or Ge'ez script, circulated from Alexandria to Sri Lanka, advertising its power and piety. Its capital became a pilgrimage site, home to what tradition claims is the Ark of the Covenant, smuggled from Jerusalem by Queen Mekta, the legendary Sheba. Strategically positioned near the Red Sea, Aksum's merchants traded ivory, frankincense, and exotic animals, while its navy patrolled waters that would later be fought over by Byzantines and Persians. Yet for all its grandeur, Aksum's decline holds equal fascination. Unlike Rome's dramatic fall, it faded quietly, its trade routes choked by the rise of Islam and shifting economies. The obelisks, once symbols of a thriving metropolis, were toppled, some by earthquakes, others deliberately, as if to erase memory. Today, only a handful remain upright, including one looted by Mussolini in 1937 and finally returned in 2005. Their survival against time and theft mirrors the resilience of the empire they represent, a kingdom that reshaped faith, trade, and art, then slipped into the shadows, leaving behind stone puzzles that still dare us to unravel their secrets. The steppes of Central Asia were no place for the faint-hearted, a vast, wind-scoured battleground where nomadic horsemen had toppled kingdoms for centuries. Yet against all odds, a pocket of Hellenistic civilization not only survived but thrived here, thanks to the Greco-Bactrians' ingenious adaptation to a world of relentless cavalry raids. When the Xiongnu, ancestors of the fearsome Huns, began pressing southward in the 2nd century BCE, these Greek-speaking rulers didn't crumble. Instead, they rewrote the playbook on frontier warfare, blending Macedonian phalanxes with local innovations to create a defense system that held the line for generations. At the heart of their strategy was fusion. The Greco-Bactrians recognized that rigid Greek formations, so effective against Persian infantry, were death traps against mounted archers. So they reimagined their armies, marrying the discipline of hoplite warfare with the mobility of Central Asian horsemanship. Their cavalry, often recruited from Saka allies, wore scaled armor inspired by both Greek linothorax and nomadic lamella, while their infantry adopted the deadly compound bows of the steppes. This hybrid force could meet the Xiongnu on their own terms, outmaneuvering them in open terrain while still holding fortified cities like Ai Khanum, where excavated arsenals reveal stockpiles of both Greek-style spears and Scythian arrowheads. But weapons alone didn't secure their survival. The Greco-Bactrians mastered the art of deterrence through diplomacy and theatrics. Coins minted by King Eucratides I show him wearing a blend of Greek and nomadic attire, a visual message of cultural fluency. They paid tribute when necessary, formed marriage alliances with neighboring tribes, and when pushed to fight, orchestrated demonstrations of overwhelming force. One account describes a battle where Greco-Bactrian cataphracts, their horses clad in bronze, charged through a simulated retreat, luring Xiongnu riders into a killing zone where phalanxes lay hidden. The psychological impact was as vital as the tactics. By proving they couldn't be easily overrun, they made conquest seem more costly than trade. Their cities became fortresses of cross-cultural exchange, where Greek theaters stood alongside Zoroastrian fire temples. The walls of Balkh, their capital, were engineered with sloping bases to deflect battering rams, while underground aqueducts ensured sieges couldn't starve them out. These weren't desperate holdouts but thriving hubs where Greek philosophy mingled with Buddhist thought, a fact immortalized in the Greco-Buddhist art of Gandhara, which might never have existed without this buffer against nomadic destruction. When the Greco-Bactrian kingdom finally fell in the 1st century BC, it wasn't the Xiongnu who broke them, but internal strife and the rising Kushan Empire. Yet their legacy endured in the very tactics that once defended them. The Kushans, inheritors of their realm, adopted their hybrid warfare, later passing it to Sassanid Persia and beyond. Even the Xiongnu, despite their raids, absorbed elements of Hellenistic culture. Archaeologists have unearthed Greek-style jewelry in elite Xiongnu tombs, hinting at a grudging admiration. What makes the Greco-Bactrian defense remarkable isn't just its effectiveness, but its philosophy. Unlike Rome's rigid limes or China's static Great Wall, their approach was fluid, a dance of adaptation and resilience. They proved that culture isn't preserved by isolation, but by the ability to evolve without losing one's core. For 200 years, they turned the frontier into a crucible, forging a Hellenism that was lighter, faster, and tougher, one that didn't just endure the steppes but left its mark on them. Beneath the quiet waters off the coast of a tiny Greek island, a corroded lump of bronze and gears sat unnoticed for 2,000 years, until it resurfaced in 1901, revealing itself as the most sophisticated piece of ancient technology ever discovered. The Antikythera Mechanism, no larger than a shoebox, wasn't some ceremonial trinket or simple timekeeper. It was a precision-engineered celestial calculator, capable of predicting solar eclipses, tracking the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games, and modeling the irregular orbit of the Moon with an accuracy that wouldn't be matched for another millennium. This wasn't just ahead of its time, it was centuries ahead of anything Europe would see again until the rise of medieval clockmakers. How did such a device come to exist in the 1st century BCE? The answer lies in the intellectual ferment of the Hellenistic world, where scholars in Alexandria and Syracuse pushed the boundaries of mathematics and mechanics to dizzying heights. Archimedes, the legendary inventor, reportedly built similar planetariums that mimicked cosmic motions, though none survive today. The Antikythera Mechanism's intricate gear trains, some with teeth cut to microscopic precision, reveal a mastery of metallurgy and astronomy far beyond what historians believed possible for the era. X-ray scans showed differential gears, a technology once thought to have been invented in the 19th century, working in concert to account for the Moon's elliptical path through the zodiac. But the real mystery isn't just how it was made, it's why this technology vanished. Rome's conquest of Greece marked a pivot from theoretical innovation to practical engineering, prioritizing aqueducts over astrolabes. The intellectual hubs that nurtured such devices, like the Library of Alexandria, fell into decline, taking their secrets with them. Even Cicero, who wrote of a similar device owned by his teacher Posidonius, seemed to regard it as a curiosity rather than a revolutionary tool. The Antikythera Mechanism likely wasn't unique, just the sole survivor of a lost tradition, a glimpse into a parallel path where ancient science might have leapfrogged straight to the Renaissance. What's perhaps most haunting is the mechanism's purpose. Unlike modern computers designed for universal tasks, this was a machine built to reveal the harmony of the cosmos. Its dials and pointers didn't just track time, they wove together the celestial and the civic, linking eclipse cycles to agricultural festivals and religious ceremonies. In a world where the heavens were seen as the realm of gods, the Antikythera Mechanism was a bridge between the divine and the mechanical, proof that the universe operated by rules that human minds could decode and even replicate in bronze. Today, reconstructions of the device hum in museums, their gears turning as smoothly as they did 2 millennia ago. They remind us that technological progress isn't a straight line, but a winding path with dead ends and forgotten genius. The Antikythera Mechanism is more than an artifact, it's a question. What other marvels were lost to time, and how different might our world be if this knowledge hadn't slipped beneath the waves with the ship that carried it? For now, it stands alone, a solitary testament to the heights ancient minds could reach when they dared to turn the cosmos into clockwork. At the height of its power, Teotihuacan was the beating heart of Mesoamerica, a sprawling metropolis of over 100,000 people, its skyline dominated by the towering pyramid of the sun and moon, its streets lined with vibrant murals depicting gods and jaguars. This was no ordinary city. It was a meticulously planned marvel with a grid layout rivaling ancient Rome, multi-story apartment compounds, and a thriving marketplace where obsidian, jade, and cacao changed hands. Yet around 550 CE, something went terribly wrong. The grand plazas fell silent, the temples were left untended, and the entire population vanished, leaving behind a ghost city that would puzzle archaeologists for centuries. Theories about Teotihuacan's abandonment read like a detective's casebook, each clue pointing to a different culprit. One of the most compelling revolves around signs of violent upheaval, burned temples, smashed statues, and piles of discarded weapons. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of a citywide revolt, with elite residences set ablaze and ceremonial objects deliberately defaced. This wasn't random chaos, it was targeted destruction, suggesting a furious uprising against the ruling class. Imagine the scene: enraged citizens, perhaps oppressed by heavy taxes or religious demands, turning on their leaders in a wave of rebellion so thorough it shattered the city's social order beyond repair. Yet fire and fury might not tell the whole story. Climate data reveals a darker backdrop: decades of relentless drought. Tree rings from the region show severe dry spells coinciding with Teotihuacan's decline, crippling its agriculture. The city's lifeblood, a complex system of canals and underground springs, may have dried up, turning fertile fields into dust. In a society where rulers derived power from their supposed ability to summon rain gods, failed harvests wouldn't just mean hunger, they'd undermine faith in the entire political and spiritual hierarchy. Starvation and revolt often walk hand in hand, and Teotihuacan's collapse might have been a deadly cocktail of both. There's another twist, though, one that lingers in the bones of the city's residents. Skeletal remains show signs of malnutrition and disease, with evidence of mass migrations in the final years. Some archaeologists argue that Teotihuacan didn't so much collapse as unravel, its people dispersing gradually to surrounding regions. This diaspora could explain why echoes of Teotihuacan's art, architecture, and gods appear in later cultures like the Aztecs, who revered the abandoned city as the place where the gods were created. The city's influence outlived its physical presence, its knowledge carried away by those who once called it home. What makes Teotihuacan's fate so haunting isn't just the scale of its abandonment, but the eerie preservation of its ruins. Unlike Rome or Carthage, rebuilt and reshaped by later generations, Teotihuacan was left frozen in time. When the Aztecs stumbled upon it centuries later, they found a sacred relic, a city so grand they believed only giants could have built it. Modern excavations continue to unveil surprises, from hidden tunnels beneath the pyramids to murals hinting at a multi-ethnic society ruled by merchants rather than kings. The truth may lie in the intersection of all these theories, a perfect storm of drought, revolt, and social fracture. But perhaps the deeper lesson is in the silence itself. Teotihuacan's ruins stand as a monument to the fragility of even the mightiest civilizations, a reminder that no city, no matter how brilliantly designed, is immune to the forces of nature, the weight of its own ambitions, or the anger of its people. Its empty avenues whisper a question that resonates across millennia. What happens when a society's foundations crack and the gods it built for no longer answer? While empires rose and fell along the Silk Road, one group of traders quietly wove the threads of commerce and culture across continents, the Sogdians. Hailing from the fertile valleys between the Amu Darya and Sirdarya rivers in modern-day Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, these Central Asian merchants turned geography into destiny. Their homeland sat at the literal crossroads of civilizations, and they leveraged this position with dazzling sophistication. Unlike the flashy caravans of Persian or Chinese royalty, Sogdian traders operated with a quiet ruthlessness, mastering languages, currencies, and local customs with such finesse that they became the indispensable middlemen of the ancient world. A Tang dynasty official once grumbled that 9 out of 10 merchants in China's western markets were Sogdian, a testament to their near monopoly on transcontinental trade. What set the Sogdians apart wasn't just their mercantile prowess, but their role as cultural chameleons. They didn't merely transport goods, they absorbed and transmitted ideas. A Sogdian merchant might start his day bargaining in Chinese, switch to Persian by noon, and conclude contracts in Turkic by evening, all while worshipping Zoroastrian fire deities, commissioning Buddhist art for his home, and carrying Manichaean scriptures in his saddlebags. This religious fluidity made them ideal evangelists for new faiths. When Buddhism trickled out of India, Sogdian traders were among the first to adopt and adapt it, translating sutras into their own script and building cave temples along trade routes. Later, they played the same role for Manichaeism, the eclectic faith blending Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism, which spread like wildfire across their networks. Their business acumen was legendary. Sogdian contracts preserved in letters found near the Great Wall reveal meticulous records of loans, partnerships, and even insurance systems for lost cargo. One heartbreaking missive written by a stranded merchant named Nanai Vandak laments the chaos of a rebellion that trapped him far from home. "I am in great trouble. There is no caravan coming from here." These fragments humanize a trade system often reduced to exotic spices and silks, showing the risks and personal toll of connecting continents. The Sogdians' greatest legacy, though, might be their invisibility. Unlike the Romans or Han Chinese, they built no vast monuments or empires, preferring profit to propaganda. Their influence lingered in subtle ways: the musical instruments they introduced to China, the grape-growing techniques they carried westward, even the term sugar derived from their word shakar. When their heyday ended with the Arab conquests in the 8th century, many assimilated into new Islamic cultures, their contributions fading into the background. Yet for centuries, they had been the lubricant that kept the Silk Road moving, the nameless facilitators of history's first globalization. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most pivotal figures aren't kings or conquerors, but those who move unseen between them, stitching the world together one transaction at a time. Deep in the dense, rain-soaked forests of Germania, a carefully laid trap was about to spring, one that would send shockwaves through the Roman Empire and alter the map of Europe forever. In 9C, Publius Quinctilius Varus, a trusted Roman general, led the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions on what should have been a routine march to quell local unrest. His guide was a man Rome considered its loyal ally, Arminius, a Germanic chieftain raised in Rome as a hostage, schooled in Latin tactics, and even granted Roman citizenship. But beneath that veneer of loyalty burned a simmering resentment. Arminius knew these woods intimately, and he knew exactly how to turn Rome's strengths against it. The ambush was a masterpiece of psychological and tactical deception. As Varus's column lumbered through the narrow, muddy trails of the Teutoburg Forest, stretched thin by supply carts and non-combatants, Germanic warriors struck from all sides. They'd spent days preparing the battlefield, felling trees to block retreats, camouflaging pits lined with sharpened stakes, and timing their attacks to exploit the chaos of a sudden thunderstorm that turned the ground into a slick death trap. Roman discipline, so lethal in open battle, became a liability in the suffocating closeness of the forest. Legionaries couldn't form their famed shield walls, their heavy armor bogging them down in the muck. Arminius's forces, lightly armored and nimble, harried them relentlessly, fading into the trees after each strike only to reappear elsewhere. For 3 agonizing days the slaughter continued. The Romans, desperate and disoriented, made frantic stands at hilltops that became mass graves. Varus, realizing the hopelessness of their position, reportedly fell on his sword rather than face capture, a final act of Roman pride. By the battle's end, nearly 20,000 legionaries lay dead, their skulls later nailed to trees as grim trophies. The few survivors who stumbled back to Roman territory carried tales of horror that would haunt the empire for generations. The shockwaves of Teutoburg reached all the way to Rome, where Emperor Augustus, upon hearing the news, was said to have wandered his palace crying, "Varus, give me back my legions." The disaster wasn't just a military loss, it was a psychological fracture. Rome had suffered defeats before, but never such a total annihilation of its finest troops on what it considered barbarian soil. The defeat forced a reckoning with the limits of imperial expansion. Future campaigns into Germania became punitive raids rather than conquests, and the Rhine River solidified as Rome's northern border. This wasn't just a tactical retreat, it was the birth of a cultural divide that would echo through European history, defining the Latin-Germanic split that shapes languages and borders to this day. Yet the story's irony lies in Arminius's own fate. Celebrated as a Germanic hero, later romanticized as Hermann the Liberator, he soon found that unifying tribes against a common enemy was easier than ruling them. His former allies turned on him, and he was assassinated by his own kin, a victim of the very fractiousness he'd exploited against Rome. The empire, though chastened, endured while the Germanic tribes returned to infighting, their victory at Teutoburg more a fleeting triumph than a lasting revolution. What lingers about Teutoburg isn't just the tactical brilliance of the ambush or the scale of the carnage, it's the tantalizing "what if" it left behind. Had those legions survived, Rome might have pushed deeper into Germania, Latinizing tribes as it had in Gaul. The course of European culture, law, and even religion could have been unrecognizably different. Instead, the forest stood as a silent witness to the moment Rome's unstoppable machine met an immovable reality. Some frontiers, no matter how mighty the empire, could not be crossed. The Teutoburg Forest became more than a battlefield. It was the line where ambition broke against the will of a people who refused to be conquered. Straddling the crossroads of the ancient world, the Kushan Empire quietly reshaped Buddhism from a local philosophy into a global faith. Emerging in the 1st century CE from the nomadic Yuezhi tribes who had once toppled the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, the Kushans ruled a sprawling territory from Afghanistan to northern India. But unlike earlier conquerors, they didn't just extract wealth, they became masterful cultural synthesizers, blending Greek, Persian, and Indian traditions into something entirely new. Their most enduring legacy, transforming Buddhism from an abstract philosophy into a vibrant visual religion, complete with the first ever anthropomorphic images of the Buddha, a radical shift that would ripple across Asia for centuries. Before the Kushans, Buddhism had thrived for 500 years without physical representations of its founder. Devotees worshipped symbols like footprints, empty thrones, or the Bodhi tree, believing the enlightened state transcended human form. But under Emperor Kanishka the Great, whose reign began around 127 CE, something extraordinary happened. Drawing on Greco-Bactrian artistic traditions where gods like Apollo and Heracles had long been depicted in marble cushion, artisans began crafting the Buddha in human form. The result was the Gandhara style, statues with wavy Greco-Roman hair draped in toga-like robes, yet seated in the lotus position with serene, meditative expressions. These weren't just artworks, they were theological breakthroughs making the divine accessible to everyday worshippers. The cushions didn't stop at statues, they built an entire spiritual infrastructure. Kanishka convened the Fourth Buddhist Council in Kashmir, standardizing scriptures and sending missionaries along the Silk Road. One monk, Lokaksema, traveled all the way to China's Han Dynasty court in 148 CE, translating key Buddhist texts into Chinese for the first time. Suddenly, concepts like karma and nirvana entered East Asian thought, carried not by force but by the cushion's soft power. Their gold coins, stamped with Buddha alongside Zoroastrian and Greek deities, became portable sermons circulating from Persia to the Tarim Basin. What made the cushion approach so effective was its flexibility. In Mathura, their southern capital, artists developed a distinctly Indian Buddha rounder, fleshier, with a gentler smile than the Gandhara version. This duality allowed Buddhism to adapt to local tastes, whether in the Hellenized cities of Central Asia or the Hindu heartland. The empire's vast trade networks amplified this cultural exchange. Caravans carried not just silk and spices but sacred texts and relic caskets, while cushion-sponsored monasteries offered lodging and spiritual guidance to weary merchants. These hubs became the ancient world's first interfaith spaces, where travelers from Rome to Chang'an could debate philosophy under the same roof. The Kushan Empire itself eventually fragmented under Sasanian and Gupta pressures, but its Buddhist legacy proved indestructible. The missionary paths they pioneered became the arteries through which Mahayana Buddhism spread to China, Korea, and Japan. Without Kanishka's statues, the breathtaking cave temples of Dunhuang or the serene Buddhas of Nara might never have existed. Even the empire's indirect contributions are staggering. By patronizing Sanskrit scholars, they helped preserve texts that would later resurface in Tibet and Nepal. Few empires have wielded belief so deftly. The Kushans understood that religion traveled best when it spoke in the local tongue, whether through Greek-style sculpture or Indian devotional poetry. In giving the Buddha a face, they gave him a passport, allowing his teachings to cross deserts and mountains until they circled the globe. Their quiet diplomacy proves that some of history's most profound revolutions aren't won by swords, but by art, adaptability, and the simple power of a well-told story. Beyond the northernmost borders of Roman Britain, where the land turned wild and the mists clung stubbornly to the hills, a people unlike any Rome had encountered before stood their ground. The Picts, named by the Romans for their painted bodies and tattoos, weren't just another barbarian tribe to be absorbed or crushed. They were the masters of a landscape so unforgiving that it became their greatest ally, and their resistance to Rome's expansion wasn't just a military feat. It was a cultural act of defiance that preserved a way of life untouched by empire for centuries. When the legions of Emperor Agricola marched into what's now Scotland in 83 CE, they quickly learned the Picts played by different rules. Unlike the Celtic tribes of southern Britain, who often fought in open battles, the Picts waged guerrilla warfare with terrifying efficiency. They knew every crag and bog of the highlands, striking from the fog before vanishing like ghosts. The Romans, masters of organized warfare, found themselves bogged down in a war of attrition against an enemy who refused to meet them on a traditional battlefield. Agricola's victory at Mons Gropius, often hailed as a triumph, was likely a hollow one. The Pictish forces melted away into the wilderness, leaving the Romans to claim empty ground. What made the Picts so formidable wasn't just their tactics, but their unity. Unlike the fractured tribes Rome had exploited elsewhere, the Picts formed loose but effective coalitions, bound by a shared identity that transcended individual clans. Their society revolved around fortified hill forts and brocks, towering stone structures that served as both homes and strongholds. These weren't primitive huts, but sophisticated feats of drystone masonry, some with double walls and hidden staircases, proving the Picts were far from the naked savages Roman chroniclers described. The most enduring mystery of the Picts lies in their symbols. Carved into standing stones scattered across Scotland, these intricate designs, from crescent moons to strange beasts, remain untranslated to this day. Some scholars believe they represent a written language, while others argue they're clan emblems or spiritual markers. What's clear is that they weren't influenced by Rome. Unlike neighboring cultures that adopted Latin script, the Picts clung to their cryptic iconography, a visual declaration of independence. Even their conversion to Christianity centuries later didn't erase these symbols. They simply incorporated crosses into their designs, blending old and new beliefs. Rome's ultimate response to the Pictish threat reveals just how deeply they were unnerved. Hadrian's Wall, begun in 122 CE, wasn't just a border, it was a psychological admission of defeat. Stretching 73 miles from coast to coast, this massive fortification declared in stone that some frontiers couldn't be crossed. Later, the Antonine Wall pushed further north, but it was abandoned within a generation. The Picts hadn't just resisted Rome, they'd forced it to redefine its limits. The legacy of this resistance echoes in the DNA of modern Scotland. While Roman influence reshaped England's language and laws, the Picts ensured the North remained culturally distinct. Their descendants, the Scots and Gaels, carried forward traditions that would one day shape a nation. Even their name Picti, the Painted Ones, endures as a badge of pride, a reminder that sometimes the fiercest battles aren't just for land, but for the right to remain unmistakably, unapologetically yourself. While Europe stumbled through its so-called Dark Ages halfway across the world, a beacon of intellectual brilliance was illuminating the Indian subcontinent. Under the Gupta Empire between the 4th and 6th centuries CE, a scientific revolution blossomed so profoundly that its echoes still shape modern mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. This wasn't just progress, it was a paradigm shift, one that gifted humanity foundational concepts we now take for granted. At the heart of this revolution was the concept of zero. Ancient Babylonians and Mayans had used placeholders, but it was Gupta mathematician Aryabhatta who transformed zero into a mathematical force. His revolutionary text, the Aryabhatiya, didn't just treat zero as an empty space, it recognized it as a number with its own properties, capable of interacting with others through addition, subtraction, and the then radical idea of negative numbers. This breakthrough didn't just simplify calculations, it made algebra possible. Another genius, Brahmagupta, later formalized rules for zero in his Brahmasphutta Siddhanta, explicitly stating that any number multiplied by zero becomes zero, a principle that underpins everything from computer code to theoretical physics today. The Gupta era's astronomical achievements were equally staggering. Aryabhatta correctly proposed that the Earth rotates on its axis, explaining day and night centuries before Copernicus. His calculations of pi at 3.1416 were remarkably precise, and his solar system model placed the planets in elliptical orbits, another idea Europe wouldn't embrace until Kepler. Observatories like the one at Ujjain became hubs of discovery, where scholars tracked celestial movements with instruments so accurate they predicted eclipses within minutes. These weren't just academic exercises, they had real-world applications, from navigation to calendar systems that still inform Hindu festivals. Medicine flourished under the same intellectual fervor. The physician Sushruta, compiling centuries of knowledge, produced texts detailing over 100 surgical instruments and 300 procedures, including cataract surgery and plastic reconstruction. His descriptions of antiseptic techniques using turmeric and boiled water predated germ theory by over a millennium. Meanwhile, Charaka's work on diagnosis and herbal remedies systematized Ayurveda into a science, categorizing diseases by their causes rather than just symptoms, a holistic approach now echoed in modern functional medicine. What's often overlooked is how these breakthroughs were nurtured. The Gupta kings actively sponsored scholars, building universities like Nalanda that attracted students from as far as China and Persia. Unlike the siloed knowledge of medieval Europe, Gupta science was interdisciplinary. Mathematicians collaborated with astronomers, who exchanged ideas with physicians, creating a feedback loop of innovation. Their achievements weren't isolated sparks, but part of a sustained blaze of curiosity. Yet for all its genius, the Gupta Golden Age remains shockingly absent from many Western histories. Perhaps because their knowledge traveled indirectly through Arabic translations that later reached Europe, their contributions were divorced from their origins. But the evidence is undeniable. From the zero in your phone to the geometry powering your GPS, the Gupta Empire's legacy isn't confined to ancient texts. It's the invisible foundation of the modern world, proving that scientific revolutions don't always wear lab coats. Sometimes they wear the saffron robes of scholars sitting cross-legged under banyan trees, rewriting the rules of reality. Rome had already been sacked once before Alaric's Visigoths had stormed the city in 410 CE, looting its treasures but leaving its structures largely intact. Yet when the Vandals arrived 45 years later in 455, they didn't just plunder, they dismantled Rome's dignity piece by piece. Genseric, the cunning Vandal king, wasn't some wandering barbarian chieftain. He was a strategist who understood Rome's weaknesses better than its own crumbling senate did. While Alaric's sack had been a desperate act by a starving army, Genseric's was a meticulously planned operation, less an invasion than a surgical strike. The circumstances leading to the attack revealed just how far Rome had fallen. Emperor Valentinian III, in a fit of paranoia, had murdered Flavius Aetius, the last competent general holding the empire together. Just months later, Valentinian himself was assassinated, and Petronius Maximus, the usurper who seized the throne, foolishly cancelled the marriage alliance between his son and Genseric's family. To the Vandal king, this wasn't just an insult, it was an invitation. When Petronius's coup collapsed almost instantly, rioters stoned him to death as he fled. Rome was left defenseless, its leadership in shambles. Genseric seized the moment, sailing his fleet up the Tiber while the city held its breath. What followed wasn't a frenzied massacre, but something far more humiliating, a methodical stripping of Rome's wealth. Unlike the Visigoths, who had targeted gold and silver, the Vandals took everything of value: statues, furniture, even the gilded bronze tiles from the Temple of Jupiter. They emptied the imperial treasury, hauled away Empress Licinia Eudoxia and her daughters as hostages, and spent 14 days looting with chilling efficiency. The most symbolic blow, the removal of the Temple of Jerusalem's treasures, which Titus had brought to Rome centuries earlier, now carted back to Carthage as if history itself were being reversed. But the true devastation wasn't in what was taken, it was in what remained. Genseric left Rome physically intact, its buildings unburned, its people unharmed. He didn't want a ruin, he wanted a message. The Western Empire still had an emperor, but everyone now knew where the real power lay. The sack of 455 wasn't just a raid, it was the moment Rome's illusion of invincibility shattered for good. The Eastern Emperor, Leo, sent a fleet to retaliate, but it was destroyed by a mix of Vandal cunning and imperial incompetence. The aftermath revealed the hollowness of Rome's legacy. The city would endure, but as a hollow shell, its fate dictated by barbarian warlords and puppet emperors. Genseric's calculated ruthlessness had exposed the empire's core weakness. It could no longer protect its own heart. Where Alaric's sack had been a shock, the Vandal raid was a confirmation, proof that Rome's decline wasn't just inevitable, it was irreversible. The Western Empire limped on for another 21 years, but 455 marked the point of no return. The Vandals hadn't just taken Rome's wealth, they'd taken its future. From vanished cities to silenced rebellions, from diplomatic masterstrokes to technological marvels lost to time, these forgotten events weren't just footnotes, they were the hidden gears that turned the machinery of history. Each one proves that the past isn't a tidy story written by victors, but a messy, living thing, full of detours and dead ends, where a single battle, invention, or betrayal could pivot the fate of millions. The Bronze Age collapse didn't just topple palaces, it cleared the way for the Iron Age. The Kushite pharaohs didn't just rule Egypt, they redefined what an African empire could be. And the Antikythera Mechanism, it whispers that our ancestors were far closer to a scientific renaissance than we ever imagined. What's haunting is how easily these stories slipped through the cracks. Some were erased deliberately, like the Hyksos scrubbed from Egyptian records or the Etruscans absorbed into Rome's myths. Others faded simply because no one thought to write them down, like the Sogdian merchants who moved the Silk Road's goods but left no grand monuments. And then there are the accidents, libraries burned, languages forgotten, technologies abandoned. These gaps in the record aren't just empty spaces, they're invitations. Every time we dig up a new clue, a shipwrecked mechanism, a vandalized stele, a coded letter, we're reminded that history, as we know it, is just the tip of the iceberg. So here's the real question, what else are we missing? If a single volcanic eruption could plunge the Mediterranean into chaos, or a lone diplomat could open trade routes that reshaped continents, what other turning points have been buried? The past is full of ghosts, not just kings and conquerors, but ordinary people whose choices rippled farther than they ever dreamed. And that's why exploring these hidden histories matters. It's not just about correcting the record, it's about seeing our own world with fresh eyes, recognizing that the forces that shaped ancient empires are still at work today, in ways we might not even notice. If these stories gripped you, if you're left wondering what other game-changing moments have been lost or dismissed, then you're already thinking like a historian. The best discoveries start with curiosity, with questioning what's been left out, so keep digging. And if you want more of these untold sagas, more revolutions, mysteries, and quiet turning points, subscribe now. Because history isn't just about looking back, it's about uncovering the secrets that still shape us, one forgotten chapter